Now, into the ticket office of Disneyland.
Oh boy, let's do this. Don't think the CIA is going to be trying to hack your second-gen iPod.
I didn't think so. There might have been a lot of illegal music on there. I wouldn't doubt it. But, I mean...
You were supposed to bring death to the flagships, not join them.
Google has found a new way to piss me off.
iTunes is a constant source of embarrassment.
Every time I say it, it's going to suck even more.
May I present to you the cat?
I am Medela. I can't do it anymore without laughing. I was going to do the whole thing.
Welcome, everyone, to the Calling All Platforms podcast. I'm your host tonight, Caleb, and I'm here with Landon.
Hello.
And again, no Wes, but this time an even more different excuse.
This one's a good excuse.
Absence. It's a pretty good excuse. So Wes had a new baby this past week, or I guess I should say Wes's wife. Wes was presumably present while his wife did something incredible, and he just hung out in the background.
Basically.
But, new child in the house, not somewhat sleep deprived, somewhat just insane at the moment, as you are for a while after a kid is born. So we're going to let him off the hook this week, and that's okay, because I have it on good authority that absolutely nothing happened at Microsoft. They actually the entire company has been closed down for the past 2 weeks. Nothing at all going on.
That's not true. I have news, Microsoft news.
Oh, crap.
It's just related to Google stuff, so I didn't put it in Microsoft.
You mean this thing that I made up wasn't true? Darn.
I mean, it's mostly true. They came out for about 10 minutes to post a tweet, and it was, we'll get to it.
Oh, man. So this is what it feels like to be on a conspiracy theorist podcast. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and jump into things that I did not make up, which, honestly, I have to preface this with that statement, because this sounds like the kind of thing that I would make up. We'll jump right in with Apple and the M4 MacBook Pro leak. So I saw this in an article, and I feel like it's mostly true that this is the biggest Apple-related leak since that one time that an iPhone 4 got left at a bar. Yeah. Was it a bar? Coffee shop? Something like that.
I think it was one of those, yeah.
Yes, and the employee responsible for that was summarily executed, drawn and quartered, burned at the stake.
He's buried under the
Steve
Jobs theater.
Yes. His bones will be there for archaeologists to dig up someday. No, that was a big deal. And I do feel like, yes, this is the biggest leak of that nature, because what happened, a Russian YouTuber, tech YouTuber, somehow managed to get his hands on the actual gosh darn laptop.
Yeah.
That has not been announced yet, is not shipping. We're not sure how this happened. He didn't say. Presumably he doesn't want to give up his sources.
No.
But he had an actual, in retail packaging, M4 MacBook Pro. Seemed like it was the base model. There were a few interesting things to note as a result of this. First of all, what we think is the base model of the M4 shipping in the MacBook Pro, the 14-inch MacBook Pro, is evidently going to have 10 GPU cores. So that is nice to know. Looked like it was also configured with 10 CPU cores, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely 8-core variants of this processor that exist. So apparently you're going to, just by virtue of getting the M4 MacBook Pro, instead of like a Mac Mini or something like that, you are going to be getting a slightly more upscale version of the processor. Nice. Also, it was configured with 16 gigs of RAM as opposed to 8. There were rumors that Apple was going to be upgrading their base configuration of RAM to 16 gigs from 8 gigs. So assuming this is, in fact, the base version of this processor, okay, that's great. Really love to see it. That's kind of it, though. So that's why I feel like, yes, this is the most significant Apple product leak since that one time an iPhone got left in a bar. But it's not as significant as the iPhone 4 was.
No.
You know, like this is just an updated laptop. We all know what the laptop looks like. It's the same. And that's why I don't think anybody is going to get drawn and quartered and burned at the stake, you know, to say nothing of the fact that I'm pretty sure Tim Cook doesn't have that energy ever, whereas Steve Jobs definitely did.
Oh, yeah.
So
Tim Cook is way too nice to do something like that.
No, he's way too chill to
Although,
execute somebody over.
He also seems like the type of person that it's like the old lady that you just don't want to. She's the nicest person you've ever met, but if you make her she's just disappointed. She's not mad. I'm just disappointed. That's Tim Cook energy right there. He's like, yeah, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. And you feel like going and dying in a hole somewhere because of the energy of coming off that way.
Oh, you made Tim sad. How could you do this? Yeah. So yeah, not nearly as significant a product, but I do feel like it's noteworthy just because what a wild thing to happen. Like we're expecting these laptops to get announced at like the beginning of next month. So it's basically here, but just a few weeks in advance to just a guy managed to get one in retail packaging. What? Well,
and
that's just wild. That's wild.
From what I heard is he claimed he bought it somewhere like on eBay or somewhere. I can't remember where.
Oh my gosh.
But the most interesting thing about that is I think it was on the Mac Break Weekly podcast. Like some of those guys know a little more about how these things get shipped and whatnot. And they're like, if he got it in full retail packaging, that doesn't mean there's just one that was lost. That means most likely means a whole pallet worth of these laptops is somewhere unaccounted for. And that's probably going to be about 100 to 200 laptops just somewhere.
That tracks. Yeah.
And that's what's even more crazy about this whole situation is, you know, there could be more of these videos popping up in the next week or two.
Yeah. Well, unless the rest of the people who got their hands on them just want to lay low.
It's all the Russian government. They're like, ooh, we finally have an Apple product.
Oh, you're probably right, actually. Yeah, that's much less interesting. All right, so that's all the Apple news. Listener, I already said that we were not going to have any significant Apple news to talk about until these new Macs launched at the beginning of November. So, yep, that remains true. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Google stuff. Landon, you want to talk about some legal things?
Oh, you know, I honestly thought this was going to be another slow week for Google because the week prior, you know, all that we had was some leaks, and we're going to get to that. But then, you know, stuff happened with Google and Epic because Epic just wants to sue everybody, apparently.
Oh, they love it. They're having such a good time.
But they actually won this one, you know, and not that they didn't win against Apple, but Apple does the Apple thing and makes it worse somehow.
They barely won against Apple. Let's be honest. They had like out of 9 things, they got one of them and Apple got the rest.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
It's so funny though, because it's the exact same lawsuit. Like they filed the exact same lawsuit against Google and Apple. Apple largely came out on top with like one little concession about being able to put a link in your app that goes outside of the App Store.
Yeah.
And then Google got like karate chopped in the back of the neck and they're just unconscious on the floor and Apple walks out the front door. What? Why are these so different?
Well, I was very curious initially when we saw that they were suing Google, I'm like, why, Epic? You can already sideload apps onto Android relatively easily. Yes, there's a lot of pop-ups from Google saying you probably shouldn't do this. And honestly, in most cases, you probably shouldn't because who knows where you're getting the app from. But you can do this already. And there are third-party app stores on Android. So I was always confused. I'm like, Epic, what do you really think you're going to get out of this? But, man, did we get a lot of stuff out of this because Google, you know, being the people that have been pushing for openness and inviting everyone to do what they want more or less on Android and whatnot, oh boy, were they doing a lot of bad things in the back end of everything. So basically, so what they were doing was more or less buying their monopoly type thing inside of Android. Not that they needed to, because reasons that, okay. So what they were doing is basically paying and incentivizing, maybe not paying, I don't know exactly if that was ever there, if it was full on money, but it definitely incentivizing OEMs to only have the Google Play Store on their devices. They were incentivizing carriers as well to not have like the Verizon App Store, because that used to be a thing, but things like that. And so they were making it like, if you do this, we're going to do such and such to you, basically. We're going to restrict a lot of different stuff and whatnot. And it was interesting. So they were doing stuff like that in the back end, which we didn't know about until this court investigation happened. So that's enlightening for sure.
Yeah.
And because of that, that's why Epic was able to win this. Just things like they were doing lots of little things like that, just making it so, just incentivizing people to not do certain things so it would make their stuff better, which really wouldn't. I don't know how that's really the case, because Samsung has their own app store, has had it forever. And really the only reason you should ever go to the Samsung app store is if you have one of the flip phones and you want to, there's a thing in there that you have to download to better utilize the cover screen on the flip phone. Other than that, there's no reason to go to the Samsung app store. So I don't fully get this.
From what I understood, with Google had an arrangement with Samsung to basically be like, hey, Samsung, you can have your store, but you need to then build into your custom version of Android that you put on your phones all of the same things that we put into ours to make it really difficult to sideload apps and install third-party app stores, and and all the roadblocks that exist in Google's version of Android for like the Pixel phones and whatnot. Yeah. Basically, they were like, Samsung, you can have your app store, but you got to build all this stuff into your version of Android as well. So, and Samsung sells the most Android phones. So that's significant.
Yeah. And they were doing just things like, they had deals like that with other OEMs and whatnot, but other OEMs didn't have their own app stores. They were just like, if you want to use Android, you have to do this, and you can't do it this way, or else, whatever.
Samsung had a bit of a better bargaining position is really all it came down to.
Pretty much. I mean, Samsung, they have, like Caleb said, they sell the most Android phones by far. So they had some pull in this for sure. But so some of the things that the judge has said that Google has to do now, starting November 1st. Now, Google is Google has already appealed this, and their reasoning is, that's really dumb too. I'll get to that in a little bit. But so this may not fully take effect on November 1st. We haven't yet seen if the judge is going to let that appeal push back this ruling or not. And it's supposed to be in effect for at least 3 years. So these are the things that Google has to do. So it says Google must distribute competing app stores through the Play Store. So you can download third-party app stores through the Play Store. You don't have to sideload them, which is very interesting. And the biggest thing here is they also must give those apps access to apps on the Play Store. So these third-party app stores don't have to start from nothing or from like maybe 100 apps. No, they get the full catalog of what is in the Play Store. That's massive. Also,
wild. It's so wild.
It says that Google may not restrict developers or device makers from working with other app stores. So that's something they were doing, like I mentioned. So they cannot do that anymore. Obvious. That's duh. You shouldn't have done that anyways.
Yeah.
And like I said, this goes into effect on November 1st, and Google has already appealed for different things. But the biggest thing to me out of this is the fact that if you want to make an app store, a third-party app store on Google or on Android, you have access to all of the apps, and you don't have to use Google Play billing to do that. You can, if you want to, if you don't want to set up your own billing thing, but you don't have to. So they don't have to pay 30% to Google on top of whatever they would be paying to you as the third-party app store developer. So there's that. Yep. So you could make your own app store, say, hey, we're only going to charge 10%. And
yeah,
I mean, now developers of games or of apps and games and whatnot can opt out of being in third-party app stores.
Yes.
But that is something that I'm pretty sure they have to go in and do themselves. I think initially it's just going to be, they're going to be there. And yes, you have to opt out of it from what I understand. I could be wrong, but that's from what I understand. That's how it is. And this is just absolutely crazy.
Yeah. You know, it's a shakeup.
Yeah.
Or maybe a shakedown. I don't know.
A little bit of both.
The thing that, like, again, that kind of blows my mind about this whole thing is that this was functionally the same lawsuit that was filed against Apple and didn't accomplish like anything. And the only thing that I can think of why this is at all different, other than the fact that, yes, there is a different judge and a different jury, and that does, like run-to-run variance in the criminal justice system, it does exist.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of this comes down to Google sells Android phones to a larger percentage of the population than iPhones, but not by that much in the United States.
Yeah.
Like, Apple, sells phones to not quite half of the country, but a significant portion of it, very close to half. So it's like, okay, yeah, technically more phones, but even more so than that, I think it honestly just comes down to the fact that Epic's lawyers went digging for dirt on Apple to try and sway a jury, and they couldn't find any because Apple has been wearing all of this crap on their sleeve the entire time. Apple has always been upfront with the, nope, no sideloading, no third-party app stores, none of this crap doesn't exist, not on our platform. You get out of here with that nonsense from the start. Yep. Whereas Google pitched this as an open source operating system built on Linux that anybody could use and implement in however they wanted. And yeah, here's our version, here's our app store, but like the concept of open source means third-party app stores and side-loaded apps are just baked in, and Google has spent all of the time since they launched Android trying to claw that away from the OEMs and the cell providers and the actual users of the operating system. And so basically they just painted a really horrible picture of themselves by trying to make themselves look better than Apple at the beginning.
Yeah.
So like, whoops.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole, like, Google is appealing this, saying, basically, it's like, yeah, why didn't this happen to Apple? And there is a little bit of a difference because the Apple one didn't have a jury, from what I understand. It was just a court or a judge ruling, whereas this one did have a jury. And so it was a little bit different, but, I mean, it probably would have come to the same conclusion because of what was found that Google was doing. And like you said, Apple, because it's always been a closed ecosystem, they weren't hiding the fact that they're trying to intimidate other manufacturers because they don't have other manufacturers using
there are
iOS.
No other manufacturers.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so this appeal really is the dumbest thing. Like, Google should have and probably could have come up with a much better reasons. Like, well, no, I don't know what the reason is, but you would think that lawyers that work for Google should have been able to come up with something better than this, but no, they didn't.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting. I don't fully get why Google gave that reasoning for their appeal, but they did. So we'll just wait and see. Basically, if their appeal does delay this from happening, I don't see that being the case, but you never really know. So
Yeah. I mean, if they can, just getting something pushed into the appeals process can delay stuff, and maybe that's going to work. I think that's probably what they're banking on, because they don't actually know how to fight this at this point.
Yeah.
So they're just like, crap, let's try and get it into appeals so that we have more time. But the appeal process also doesn't have to include a stay of judgment. So they may rule that, like, yeah, sure, you can appeal it, but in the meantime, you have to do all these things. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out. And it's flipping wild. It's flipping wild how this all came down. And what I love about it is that the judge was all like, and if you don't do this list of things, then we're going to have to look at breaking up the company. And I'm like, whoa.
Well, that's a little bit, there's a different case going on with that. I mean, the judge that may have been the case, but there is another, like the Department of Justice also is going after Google.
Yes.
And
so the Department of Justice is like, has their whole suit going on. And essentially, was it in the judge's ruling or was it just in a statement that he made? I can't remember. He said something along the lines of not failing to implement the things that are outlined in this ruling is going to have implications regarding Google's antitrust behaviors and stuff like that, and may require involvement of antitrust regulation, which is, so yeah, I guess he didn't say like, we're going to look at breaking up the company, but he strongly insinuated that there might be some antitrust regulators that are already looking at Google who would be very interested in how this whole situation resolves itself.
Yeah, and speaking of that goes very nicely into that case that the Department of Justice has against Google. So because of all this, like you said, if I think exactly what Google does here will make a big, like, it will have much greater influence on what happens with the Department of Justice, because, like you said, if Google doesn't just go along with what is the judge wants to have happen, then the Department of Justice, has a lot more sway, and they're wanting to break up Google. And basically, like, they're looking at breaking up the part of Google that's like search and Chrome and Android and different things like that. And part of it is like they don't want Google to be the default search engine inside of other browsers and different things. More along the lines of like paying people to be the default search, which I get for some people, like for Apple, that they don't need the money by any means.
No.
It's not going to hurt Apple. It's actually going to be it's kind of a win-win in a way, because Apple's going to use Google anyways, because they've already admitted Google's the best one out there. They just happen to be paying us a lot of money. The type of people that it is going to hurt is like Firefox basically lives off of money they get from Google by being the default search engine. So it could hurt them a little bit if that goes away and smaller browsers like them. But we'll have to see if this actually goes through. I honestly don't think the breaking off of Android would be the worst thing in the world. And just Google can still have Pixel and all that stuff. Android can do its thing, and then Google just uses Android as its operating system. But they've already got their own flavor. OEM. Yeah, they've already got their own flavor of Android as it is. Like, stock Android is not what it used to be. It's not what comes on the Pixel phone anymore. There are Pixel exclusive features. They do eventually come to stock Android, but it usually takes at least 6 months to a year to happen.
Well, interestingly, there's stock Android and then there's stock Android.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Linus Tech Tips on YouTube actually did a reasonably good overview of this a few months back. They basically went and were all like, you know what? Let's go download actual pants stock Android, install it on a Pixel device, and see what it's like to use.
Yeah.
And if you go to the actual, because Android is an open source operating system, and so you can just go download the source code for it off of the internet. And if you go download the source code for Android, which is maintained and like technically operated, like servers are operated and stuff like that by Google, you can get that, and it's functionally not recognizable as an Android phone.
Yeah.
Essentially. Like it's got nothing in common with modern Android devices at all, and that includes any of the Pixel specific features. Then there's the version of Android that is not entirely open source, that has a bunch of stuff that is exclusively owned by Google built on top of it, that includes features that Google filters out to the rest of the Android OEMs over time.
It's the Google Play Services package, basically.
Yes. And that's, you know, if you consider stock Android to be Android, the operating system, with all of the Google Play stuff stacked on top of it, then yeah, like those features do go out. But that is fundamentally different from what stock Android actually is. And Google does control all, like, that whole layer of stuff completely outside of the realm of open source things. So I think that, yeah, you can split Android off from like Google, but technically with it being open source, it kind of already is, and it just doesn't actually include anything anymore. Like, OEMs have to build a whole ton of software on top of what stock Android is in order to get a functional smartphone.
Yeah.
And so what I think would be really interesting would be to see if they leave the Pixel business and Android stuff together and split that off from like search and advertising. So like you've got your search and ad stuff over here, and then you've got Android and Pixel on the other side. And then we see how things look, especially if, where would Chrome go in this circumstance? Because if Chrome goes with the Android people and search stays over on the other side of that fence, then suddenly Chrome, like the search people would have to try and get Chrome to have Google be the default search engine. And wow, yeah, it's really strange. Like, how do you break up Alphabet as a company?
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know. Google, maybe just like play nice.
Yeah. Because, I mean, as much as we complain about Google not communicating well department to department, because they really don't, they are still, like, everything is still so intrinsically linked that it would not be a good thing overall, at least initially, for these things to all be separated out again. Because, like, you can take Chrome and search and split those things up. That's perfectly fine, because you can already download, like, set a different search engine inside of Chrome. And Chrome is also, it's kind of the same thing as Android is. Like, there's Pixel version of Android, there's Google's version of Chrome. Because if you think about it, Microsoft also, like, their Edge is based off the Chromium,
is built off of
browser.
Chromium. Yep.
And same with, I think, Firefox, I think now uses Chromium.
Not Firefox.
No. It's
Firefox and Safari are the two holdouts. True. Everyone else uses Chromium.
Yeah.
Basically, every other browser is built off of Chromium at this point, aside from Firefox and Safari. That's it. It's wild.
Yeah. And so it's like, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, yes, there is the base version of Chromium, and then there's Chrome. There's the base version of Android, and then there's Pixel or Samsung or Motorola, name your manufacturer, Android. And so it would be really interesting to see how things would really function if things were split up.
Yeah.
It would be crazy.
And that's the thing is, I think that if this, assuming kind of the worst case for Google, and they are split up along some lines, there's going to be super strange questions that have to be answered. Like, okay, we're splitting the search business off from Chrome, right? Like Chrome and search are being split. Okay. Does Chrome include like all of the user data for the people that use their stuff and have Google accounts, and or does that go with the search people? And do the search people get to keep Gmail?
Yeah.
Who gets Gmail?
Yeah.
Like who gets Google Docs? Is that going to be a separate company as well? And then like we got Pixel and Android stuff happening over here. And do ads get to stay with search, or do they have to be separate as well? And if the ads are split off, then like if you've got AdSense integrations on Google products, where's the divide there? Like, it would be a really, really messy breakup because Google powers so much of the internet at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it would be really messy. I think that it's the kind of thing that long term could have tangible benefits for the marketplace as a whole.
Absolutely.
But in the short term, wow, it would
nightmare.
be really rough.
Yeah.
It would be so rough.
And I honestly think, like I think you could get away with breaking off basically the things that Google bought, like Android. Android started as its own thing. Google bought them. You could break that off and be fine. Whereas like Chrome and search, especially search, that was Google's bread and butter. That's what they were when they started. Chrome kind of came off of what search was. So, and like Google Docs and all that stuff is made by Google. They weren't purchased by Google from elsewhere.
Yeah.
So like that sort of stuff, I could see that would be a lot more difficult to break up those things. But Android as its own thing, I think is very feasible and honestly wouldn't be the worst thing as long as they get to keep the part of Google, quote unquote, that is Google Play services and everything that is involved with Android. Because if they don't get that, there's no reason to break off Android because it would just, it already is that way. So if they can keep all that stuff and do their own thing and Google has to pay them to use it or whatnot, basically the same setup as it is now, that's, I think in the long run would not be a bad thing. But like you said, short term would be very interesting.
So messy. Just like, ooh.
It's interesting. So, and now my question, and this kind of is just a generic, all of this legal stuff, the Epic stuff, the DOJ stuff, is any of this going to be a good thing for the consumer? And we kind of already answered that, at least on the Android side of things. But so I guess my question more goes back to the third-party app store, like that sort of stuff. Like, is any of this going to be a good thing for the consumer? Or is the average consumer even going to notice?
And that's the thing. I feel like the average consumer would definitely notice in the event of some large antitrust action that splits the company up.
Yeah.
That's going to affect everybody. That would be super obvious. And I think the long-term benefit of that is that suddenly then Google just, or Pixel, whatever, Android becomes its own, like, just essentially just another OEM.
Yeah.
They sit in the same marketplace as the Samsungs of the world, whatever, and they have their software layer that is, the same, like, as it is, that offers a lot of value and whatnot, and can be licensed out to other OEMs if they want to use stuff like the Play Store and all the Play Store services. But so long as we have this Epic ruling in place, every other OEM could feel free to offer their own competing app stores and build up a competing service. And I think that in general, you would end up with a lot of different OEMs competing against each other on more even footing, right? Which on the face of it sounds really good. But the only problem I see with that is that the person who wins in this scenario is just Apple. It's just Apple wins at that point. because suddenly there's no large repository of apps competing against Apple's ecosystem and App Store. It's a whole bunch of different app stores based on which hardware you bought your phone on, and they're all making separate deals with app developers and yada, yada, yada. And yes, you can sideload stuff, but how do you trust where you get it from? And I think that average consumers would flee Android in droves. And where do they go? Just Apple. That's the only other option. So, like, that's my thing. I don't know that that is a good thing for the consumer, because it sounds like it would be really good. And as the type of person who really likes just, open stuff, as the type of person who's actually, like, considering switching to a Windows laptop because Apple hardware is really expensive and their old hardware won't run new software because they just stop supporting operating systems after a few years, whereas you can still install new software on Windows 97 if you want to, but it might not work. Wait, Windows 98. Anyways, yeah, like, it sounds great from that perspective, but from the perspective of, this just turns Apple into a one-stop monopoly, I don't love that. So I don't know if that is a long-term benefit, these two things combined. But also, I don't know. It's so complicated. There's so many interactions between what's happening with the Epic stuff and what's happening with the antitrust stuff with the Department of Justice. And just the fact that, like, Google is such a huge multi-armed conglomerate that has little tentacles that are in basically everything. The consequences are far-reaching and potentially catastrophic for the market as a whole.
Yeah.
Either way, if Google wins, it could be catastrophic as well, because then Google is all like, turns out now we can stop hiding our anti-consumer behavior because we won in court.
Yeah.
And then they just start being even worse. And I don't know.
See,
it's hard. It's a really hard question to answer.
Now, when it comes to the third-party app store stuff, I don't see it quite going the way you were talking. Because honestly, I think the vast majority, like, I would dare say more than 90% of consumers that use an Android phone aren't going to even know that there are third-party app stores now available unless it's advertised somewhere. The ones that are going to notice the most are going to be your already, like, the gamers out there that, because they know who Epic is because of different games that they've made outside of Android, Epic's going to be blasting the crap out of this to anybody that is in the realm of gaming.
They already are.
So they're going to know about this. Epic is going to have their own app store for sure, obviously. And it was also announced, this is the Microsoft news, they've already said that you will be able to buy Xbox games inside of the Xbox Android app on starting November 1st, as long as things go as they're supposed to.
Yes.
So there is that. The one thing I did hear, can't remember where I heard this, but somebody mentioned that the potential of there being more or less for this is the comparison that was made, and it makes the most sense to me, but like Steam, they don't always get games right off the bat, usually not. They get them a little bit later from like Xbox or whatever, but they eventually do have them. And there's a lot of people out there, Caleb included, that will just wait until it comes to Steam, and then they'll either buy it from them or even wait a little longer till it gets a little cheaper and still buy it from Steam rather than buying it elsewhere. That could be the case with certain games on Android. I don't necessarily think regular apps will benefit from this as much, but games on Android could be. No, I don't necessarily think it'll come from Xbox or Epic, but someone, heck, even Steam, could have their own third-party app store specifically for games or different things like that, that, again, may not come initially to that app store, but down the road will, and maybe for a little bit cheaper because they're not charging 30% to house the app. They're charging 10, 5, who knows what, They're taking a much smaller cut. App developers will eventually see that, and I could see something like that happening, But again, it's a very small market that I think would even do that, because your generic average consumer is just going to be like, oh, the Play Store is right here. I'll just go download what everything I already have is from the Play Store. I'll just keep using that. And so, like, I don't think it's going to be the worst thing out there. And I honestly, potentially, if these third-party app stores do start to gain traction, and if they're offering, like Google has a thing right now that most apps are 15%, some are 30%, depending on size and downloads and whatnot. Like, if they're offering a smaller cut or taking a smaller cut, it's going to potentially force Google to do the same thing. It might take a while before that happens, but I would hope that that's the case. And if that's the case, it could, I don't think that this necessarily will happen, but it could also make Apple be like, oh, we need to start competing with these other stores. Yes, they're not on iOS or on Mac, but developers are expecting that right now. So in order to really get more apps or the same apps over to iOS and Mac, we need to take a little bit less of a cut. Again, I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen, but I could see that playing out long term. This is not going to be a short term thing by any means. Not even in the next 3 years where all this stuff has to happen with Google. But in the next 5, 6, 10 years, who knows, maybe that could happen. I hope it would happen. But that's the good side of potentially what could happen here. Like what Caleb said is like not necessarily a worst case scenario, but not a good case scenario. Mine's not necessarily a best case scenario, but a better case scenario.
Yeah, it's the worst case scenario from Google's perspective is what I'm talking about. Essentially, like, they are unable to win any sort of appeals on this Epic case, and they're not considered to be following suit with a negative ruling in the Department of Justice case sufficiently to the extent where antitrust regulators split the company into pieces.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of the worst case scenario from Google's perspective. And that's where I feel like we run into issues is when these two things interact with each other. Yeah. This requirement that, hey, you have to allow the existence of sideloading in third-party app stores. And also, Android as an operating system is no longer yours. Android as an operating system is a thing that anybody gets to use however they want, which is technically kind of already how it is. But now that you no longer have a stranglehold over people with all of these, negative implications if they want to use or have any access to your Play Store stuff, and oh hey, they have access to the entire Play Store now because of the Epic ruling, all the apps on that are available to them as a list, then you can bet your butt that the minute that Pixel and the Google Play Services thing becomes a separate company from Google and they're no longer dealing with the behemoth that is Alphabet, every single OEM would make their own app store for their devices and just feed you the Play Store's app database from that store. It would be a different storefront. They wouldn't have all the Play Store integrations. They wouldn't have all the Pixel features, yada, yada, yada. There'd be a whole list of things that you would lose. However, a lot of these OEMs already have replacements and or stand-ins for those things in place.
Yeah.
And then being able to replace all the App Store stuff and take that 30% cut that Google gets for themselves, they would kill for that. And yeah, and then suddenly every single Android phone that everybody's buying that isn't a Pixel doesn't have the Play Store anymore. It's just not even there. And from the average consumer perspective, like, the power user would be able to go download the Play Store 100% because this Epic ruling is going to apply to all of the OEMs. None of them are going to be able to lock you into a Play Store on Android or an App Store on Android. But the average consumer wouldn't know about it. So they'd be downloading their apps from the Motorola store or maybe Verizon has an app store that ships on all the Verizon phones and yada, yada. It would basically go back to where we were before the Play Store was the de facto default app store on Android, which was kind of a short-lived period at the beginning of Android's existence. but it did happen. There was, I mean, my very first smartphone was an LG Optimus bought through Sprint, and it had a Sprint app store installed on it. I don't think I ever downloaded a single app, but I did have apps from it because phones back then just came pre-installed with a whole whack ton of bloatware and other nonsense trash, which really glad they stopped doing that, you know?
Yes.
That was not good times. But yeah, like that's the worst case from Google's scenario. And I think that there might be some positive things in there from the consumer perspective, but there's also negative things too. I don't know. This is really hard.
I mean, I could also see if that were the case, like if like Motorola or Lenovo, or the same company, Huawei, or these different companies do make their own app store, which, like you said, they very easily could and probably will. If they don't also have the Play Store on there, they're going to be like, oh, look at this new app store. People are going to be like, well, I don't have an account with that, even though technically you do. They're not going to realize that unless it's somehow blatantly like, this is the app store, just a different name. They're not going to really, they're going to see that like, oh, I don't want to buy that phone because I've already got my apps from the Play Store. So I'm going to get a different phone that has the Play Store. I could see that happening too.
There might be, like there might be a boost in sales of Pixel devices because of that. People that are all like, well, I know the Play Store and I like the Play Store, so I'm going to stick with the one phone that has that now.
Yeah.
And they'll buy that. But the Samsung people, they won't switch. They're buying another Samsung regardless. And they, Samsung would just be like, hey, it's just the Samsung store now, but we have all the same apps in it that used to be in the Play Store. So now you just have the one app store, and they already have a Samsung account. It was tied to their Google account before. This is not new to them. And for the rest of them, I think that a lot of them are going to just buy a phone without really thinking about it first. During the setup process, they're going to sign in with some kind of an email because they're used to doing that. And then it will just give them an app store that says, hey, download your apps here. And it's already tied to your account that you signed into the phone with. And they're not even going to think twice about it. They might just Google, they might search some stuff in there. I just said Google because it's so ingrained. They might search for something in there and find that it's not available or like has some kind of weird stipulation because it's a different app store. And they'll just be like, oh, weird. Kind of lame that that's how this is now. And then just move on with their lives,
Yeah.
So it can be kind of baffling how little attention people pay. Because honestly, I'd be willing to bet that there's a significant portion of people who have a Motorola phone who don't even know what the Play Store is. Like, yes, it says Play Store, but they talk about it to their friends as the App Store, not recognizing that the App Store and the Play Store are two different things. And they can't have the App Store because they don't have an iPhone.
Yeah.
They don't know. This is just the place where they get their apps from.
Exactly.
This is such an interesting ball of wax and is every bit as fascinating to me as like kind of what would it have been like if Microsoft had been split up back in the 90s via antitrust? Like that would have been so wild, so crazy. And it's interesting to think about and whatnot. We're kind of living through that scenario now. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And I don't know, like there's are good things, there's bad things either way that I can conceivably see happening.
Yeah.
It's a wild situation.
Yeah. I mean, no matter what happens, it's not going to be 100% good or 100% bad for anybody. It's not going to be perfectly good for Google. It's not going to be perfectly good for the consumer or vice versa. There's going to be good things and bad things for everyone, no matter what happens here. It's just a matter of how big of an impact those good and or bad things take on either party.
Yep.
And it's going to take probably 5 years or more to actually play out. So we'll see. We'll keep following this because it is potentially really big things happening here.
Yep.
And like we've already explained, could have some drastic things happening because of all this.
Yeah.
So,
it's crazy stuff.
Yeah. All right. Now on to some other, I can't say necessarily good, but interesting Google news. The Pixel 9a has leaked because it's Google, and they can't not leak things except for what they force OEMs to do, apparently.
Look, at this point, it's basically a product announcement. Like, just...
Yeah, I mean, so the only thing that I really care to talk about in these leaks, we know a lot about the Pixel 9a at this point. But the thing that I really want to mention that is not necessarily mind-boggling, but just confusing to me is it doesn't have the camera bar. And, I mean, yes, the Pixel phones haven't always had the camera bar. I think that started on the 4. I think it was the Pixel 4.
Might have been the 5.
It was one of those. Because my Pixel 3 did not have one.
No, the 3 did not for sure.
Yeah. So
Can't remember if it was the 4 or 5.
Yeah, I mean, the Pixel 3 was my last Pixel phone, so I don't know after that. I've never had the camera bar. But it's kind of become an iconic, like you see the camera bar, you know that's a Pixel phone. Kind of the same thing with the iPhone. You see the little oven top there, you know that's an iPhone. And it's almost come the same thing with Samsung. You see a vertical line of just camera, just little holes, little circles on the phone. That's a Samsung phone. You can, I mean, if you're looking at these phones all from the front, you're not going to tell any of them apart. But at least from the back, they have their own distinguishing features. I mean, I guess the iPhone has the what do they call it? The island thing?
Dynamic island.
That's the word. Oh, so stupid.
It's just a little bit wider than everybody else's hole punch camera.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's interesting to me that they're kind of taking this away. So what it is on the Pixel 9a, at least the leaks, again, this is not for sure, but it's for sure. It's just like a little pill, not like the iPhone 10 where it was a vertical. This is a horizontal pill.
Oh, so like the iPhone 7.
There, yes, and just bigger.
Like 7 Plus, I guess.
Yeah, it's just bigger than that because the sensors are massively bigger than they were back then. It's really interesting, and I just don't love it because Google, you had this really nice thing going, and my favorite part about it was literally every other phone you put on a table back down, you try to use it, it's gonna rock back and forth in one way or another. Whereas all of the Pixel phones, because they had a bar that stretched across the whole back of the phone, it sat not flat, it was kind of propped up, but it didn't rock back and forth. It was stable, and it was great. You're going to lose that here because there's still a camera bump, because they can't get rid of camera bumps for some stupid reason. That was the thing I loved about the original Pixel phone and the Pixel 3 was it was like a tapered design, like the top of the phone was thicker than the bottom of the phone, but it was flat. And it worked great. And then the bar came out and it wasn't flat anymore, but at least it was still stable. Whereas every other phone, even with a case on it, unless you get a really thick case, is still going to rock. So I don't fully understand this. They kind of started this with the 9 Pro Fold. It has like that camera square on it. And it made a little bit of sense on there just because of what the phone is. Right. But on your regular candy bar style phone, why do you think you need to go away from this iconic design that, again, everybody sees that and they know that's a Pixel phone?
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I really hate companies that design hardware that have like some kind of really iconic design to their hardware that is just like, hey, this is our calling card.
Yeah.
And then they will massively deviate from it, Like think of the one that really bugged me was Chevy. Like all of their the Chevy bow tie, if you pay any attention to cars, it's an iconic emblem. Yeah. You can recognize it easily anywhere. And for the longest time, it was in the middle of the grill. Then the grill was split horizontally. And then in the 2000s, Chevy decided to just kick that to the curb for a half dozen years. And all of their cars looked They just kind of slapped the bow tie in somewhere, and they just looked faceless. The cars, they made no sense. They made no gosh darn sense.
Well, and some of the trucks
Until-
didn't even have the bow tie; it just said Chevrolet across the front.
Yeah, and it was dumb. And they are now back to putting a horizontal bar across all their grills because it just made more sense. Ford consistently struggles with trying to find some kind of identity to the face of their vehicles because they never did that. They never had something iconic that you could latch onto versus, like Chevy had the horizontal bar. Pontiac had a vertical bar that would split the grille into two parts. BMW has the stupid little kidney grills, and they keep getting more and more ridiculous. But and ugly and hideous, and I hate modern BMWs. To be clear, they're grody looking from the front. However, it's iconic. You can't look at that and not know it's a BMW.
It's the same thing
impossible.
It's the same thing with Dodge. Now, I guess Ram, technically, they have the Ram's head.
Yeah.
They've had that forever, and they still utilize. It's not like a full-on hood ornament like it used to be in the 80s. But
that was good.
It's still the big Ram's head, and like Ford does have their logo is iconic, and it's on the back of all the vehicles.
Sure.
But the front, is, like you said, the front has always been weird.
It's faceless.
Yeah.
It's faceless, and like you look at iconic design, just everywhere in the world of hardware. Everybody is trying to latch on to what makes their device or their product iconic, and Google, you had that.
Yeah.
You had a thing where if anybody was looking at the back of your phone, they're like, oh, right, the Google one. Like, yeah, that's what you want, guys.
Yeah.
You had it. You can iterate on that design. You can tweak it and you can do funky things with it. Like I said, look at BMW. The grills that they have now look nothing like the grills they had in the 80s, but they've still got the two little kidney beans next to each other. They're not little anymore. They're gigantic. They're monstrous, cavernous even. I hate them. I hate them so much. But they're iconic. They're recognizable. You had the camera bar. Nobody looked at the back of a Pixel and thought, could that be an iPhone? Because it didn't look like an iPhone.
Yeah.
And now, guys, come on. Now it's just a little pill thing. You want to know what that looks like? A cheap $200 Chinese smartphone that you bought off of AliExpress. Guys, you don't want this.
Yeah. I don't understand why they're doing it, but I really hope they don't do this with the Pixel 10, like their flagship phones.
Yeah.
But because it is happening on the 9A, I don't see a way that it's not going to be this way on the 10, unfortunately. And they've kind of, the 9 phones do have, it's not a full, it doesn't stretch across the entire back. It doesn't go frame to frame with the bar like it used to. It is kind of a giant elongated pill, but it is still, it goes across the 99% of the back. It's a bar. It's a noticeable bar, whereas this one is a pill. It's a big pill, but it's a pill. Yeah. And it's just not that iconic Pixel look that we've come accustomed to and look for when you're like, well, okay. I look for because I'm the weird person that when I see somebody out using their phone, I'm like, oh, what phone is that? I can tell. And I can also tell if it's a specific Motorola phone or a different, because I'm a nerd like that and I know phones because me. But the average person, again, they see that bar, they think, oh, that's the Google phone. Or they see the square with the 2 or 3 cameras, that's the iPhone.
Yep.
They've had that. But now they're, for some dumb reason, going away. And Google, you're doing it wrong.
Yep. Good times.
That's all the Google stuff that for some I thought might have been good. None of it's good news, really.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. We're going to go ahead and move into some general tech news. And I'm going to start off with Intel, who this past week announced officially, in an official capacity, the Core Ultra 200 series of processors. Now, as I have previously mentioned, and in the podcast, we're going back. We're jumping from 14 right? 15 was going to be the next generation of core processors. But no, we're jumping back to 200. Cool. Thanks,
Yeah.
Intel. Why? Nobody knows. Nobody can give me a good reason for that. But they announced 3 processors. Well, sort of 6 processors. There's the Core Ultra 9 285, the Core Ultra 7 265, and the Core Ultra 5 245. Now, technically, there's a 285. What they actually announced was the 285K and the 285F. No. N? Something like that. And then the 265K and the 245K, and then the F variants of both of those. I think the F versions are the ones that don't have built-in graphics, as I recall. So that's what they announced and talked about. And this announcement included things like core counts for these processors and base clock speeds and boost clock speeds and so on and so forth, as well as prices, which are generally in line with the launch prices for the equivalent processors from the last generation. I have the highlights of what Intel claims about these processors. We're just going to go ahead and run through them. First of all, there's no hyperthreading on these processors anymore, which means that you're getting an actual core decrease, like in the number of threads you will have from the last generation. Now, the past couple of generations with Intel utilizing a big little processor design, the big cores, the P cores, the P cores, power cores, had hyperthreading. The efficiency cores, the E cores, did not, right? But now, no more hyperthreading on the P cores. Does not happen. That being said, Intel is claiming a 9% IPC increase on the P cores over the last generation. That's instructions per clock, meaning that more stuff gets done for each clock cycle on the processor. So 9% increase in IPC. Drastic improvements in efficiency, meaning the amount of processing that gets done per watt of power used. And significant uplifts in compute and AI workloads, which surprises nobody. Rumors already had these things in terms of AI stuff out-competing Qualcomm's fancy stuff that they were doing for the Copilot processors or Copilot PCs from Windows. So, like, whoops. Good timing, Qualcomm. Also, Intel claims 5% slower gaming than the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D, which is from AMD's last generation of processors because they haven't released their current 9800 X3D. I think that one is fascinating because AMD didn't even admit that the 7800 X3D was a better gaming processor than their brand new 9000 series processors, despite the fact that they sell both processors. And honestly, it would not have been like that much of face lost for AMD to be like, hey, remember that awesome gaming chip we made last generation? These new chips technically can't beat it. They're better for all-out compute, but they can't beat it in gaming workloads. But don't worry, we're going to come out with a 9800 X3D that will, right? That would have been totally fine for AMD to say. They didn't say that. They claimed that, yeah, our processors are better than the 7800 X3D. Turns out, no, they're not. Oops. Intel, on the other hand, is just kind of sliding out here like, yeah, that really great gaming processor from our direct competitor, it's really great, guys. It's better than these at video games. So don't buy these if that's your main workload. like that was an actual part of their presentation when they announced these things was, yeah, it's going to be slower, about 5% slower than the 7800 X3D at the top, like the Ultra 9 285K. It's just, yeah, we can't beat it. And I'm like, wow, I really appreciate the honesty, Intel. It's kind of crazy. It's wild, but what a chip, what a powerhouse. So yeah, if you have a 7800 X3D and you want to play games, don't upgrade anytime soon. There is one thing that's slightly concerning about this to me, because it sort of seems like Intel is acknowledging that, hey, we're not really making processors for gamers at the moment. We're kind of making them for people who want to do AI stuff or whatever, which is like, cool. So we're just not making processors for consumers at all anymore.
But these can't be AI processors because they don't have the Copilot Plus name on them.
Well, they don't say AI anywhere in the product SKU. How on earth could it be an AI processor? They're just gonna put an I at the end of Ultra, so it's Ultra AI. And that'll be the new naming for their processors going forward. Actually, no, forget I said that. Intel, don't listen to me. What am I doing?
If they don't do that next year, I'm going to be disappointed.
I'm making the world actively worse. Oh, good times. So yeah, that was what Intel announced. They obviously lots more detail to it. And if you want more detail on this, you can go look it up. But I looked into it sufficiently far to satisfy myself that none of these processors were anything I was even remotely interested in purchasing. And none of them were designed with mainstream consumers in mind. And that seems to be the case for both of those things. So there you go. All right.
Nice.
We'll move on from Intel to a different processing company, MediaTek, who has something about the Dimensity 9400. That is a terrible, terrible product line name, Dimensity. Is that really what they're calling that?
I mean, the Dimensity line has been their flagship chips for a while.
MediaTek, what are you doing?
Hey,
all right, Landon, take it away.
It's better than the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Samsung or whatever, for Galaxy or whatever,
You're right. That's true.
In a world of really bad names, this is not the worst by far. It's one of the better ones, in my opinion.
Oh, man.
Anyways.
Why do we have so many bad names?
Oh, because people aren't hiring us in their marketing departments, which they really should.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, anybody listening, we're open to it. Come on. Anyways. So MediaTek has unveiled their latest flagship processor, the Dimensity 9400, and it is the first 3-nanometer chip that'll be coming to an Android phone. So that's cool. They beat Qualcomm to that, which, I mean, it's rumored that Qualcomm is going to be announcing the new Snapdragon chip later this month, which will also be on the same 3-nanometer node as this. And interestingly enough, I mean, MediaTek does use TSMC to make these processors. So they're using basically the same process as Apple's using because it's all in the same place, more or less.
Yeah.
So that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. They did say that this is going to be 40% improvement in power efficiency when compared to last year's 4-nanometer Dimensity 9300.
Wow.
That's a significant upgrade.
A lot.
Yes.
Dang.
And again, this is what MediaTek is saying. These chips are not in devices yet. We cannot test them fully.
Right.
My favorite thing though is they did send some of these chips to reviewers. I don't know exactly how they can test them. There's ways to do that. I don't know how it works.
It's just in like a little plastic tray. Like, cool. Yeah. Here's the silicon.
But the best part
Solder
is
it to something, I guess.
Yeah, they sent these chips in a chip bag, like a potato chip style
like potato
bag.
Chips.
And
that's funny.
I mean, listener, it even says new bold 3-nanometer flavor on it, and it's fantastic.
Oh man, that's great.
I love it. I love when companies do things like that because it's just great. It's great.
Yeah. See, that's when the marketing department is working like it's supposed to.
Yeah. Well, when they're not coming up with stupid names, they have more time to, make fun things.
Yes.
Anyways, some details on this chip is so last year they came out with what they called the all big core design. So basically there's no power cores and efficiency cores. They're all just big, as they call them, which is interesting.
That's funny that they claim to have invented that, given that like that's how processors were designed for literally decades up until a few years ago.
Yeah, it's fun. But that being said, there still are differences between these different cores. So it says there is one main core that's a Cortex X925 running at 3.62 gigahertz. That's the big one, the big one. And then there's a 3-core setup with the Cortex X4 cores and a 4-core, and then 4 Cortex A720 cores. So 8 cores, one big one, 3 smaller big ones, and then 4
Medium
smaller
ones.
big ones. I don't know.
So, how is this different than a big little design, MediaTek?
I don't know.
Because it sounds to me like you've got big and little, maybe just also medium in there as well.
Yeah.
So, big, medium, little?
I don't know.
What the heck, guys?
So MediaTek is saying that this new chip on a single core on Geekbench's single core test hits 3055. So not too bad. And then on the multi-core, it's a 9600 score on that, which according to those numbers is a 35% and 28% respectively increase to last year's core or chip, which both of those are significant jumps in a year-over-year processor. So that's nice. And then also compared to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, on the single core was a 2140 and the multi-core is 6688. So noticeably larger scores than that. So
yeah,
that's nice. Now my question there is this actually MediaTek's first respectable flagship chip? Because their ones previously have never really been that great. I mean, the 9300 was good, but nobody used it. This one actually has a chance of being used.
Like MediaTek's processors, like their flagship processors have always been like, hey, this is a perfectly serviceable processor and it's not very expensive, but it competes with Qualcomm's like mid-range processors, not their high-end stuff. This actually sounds like it's going to compete with their high-end stuff. So that's refreshing.
Yeah. I actually am very curious to see like third-party tests on this device and then see it in a device because I mean that's really where you're going to notice things is how does it actually function in a phone, because Geekbench scores are one thing, usability completely different. On the processing side of things, that does say it uses ARM's latest 12-core Immortalis G925 GPU, which is claiming 40% performance boost from last year's MediaTek chip. So,
I mean, 40% more than like 10 FPS is, I mean, still not a ton, but it's much better. That's like almost 15 FPS.
Well, okay. That side
I'm being a little bit harsh, but
it does say again, this is what MediaTek is saying, that it supports a WQHD plus resolution, whatever that is, at 180 hertz refresh rate. So
yes, but doing what? Like that's the thing. Showing a white screen, that's cool, but like,
yeah, that's definitely the question. There is, what can we actually do with this chip inside of a phone?
What you want to do something besides just display the home screen and like scroll back and forth between pages of apps? Psycho.
Yeah. So I'm definitely curious to see if any of these. I mean, Samsung's not going to use it. Google's obviously not going to use it, but I want to see like Motorola put this in a flagship phone, see how it goes. Because I want there to be more competition than just Qualcomm in the mobile side of things. Because right now, that's really all there is.
Motorola, put this in the Razr.
Ooh.
Put this in the Razr so that you can keep selling the Razr at significantly lower prices than all the other folding phones and yet get performance close to the other folding phones, that would be dope, guys. Just saying.
Yeah. That would be cool. Yeah. So I want to see this in some sort of relatively popular device to see how it actually performs. Because if it's already beaten the numbers from last year's chips, both their own and Qualcomm's the way it is, that's fantastic.
Pretty good.
Again, we'll have to wait until Qualcomm has their Snapdragon Summit later this month and see what they announce, because they're going to have AI in the name. I almost guarantee it, because they should have last year, but they didn't. So yeah,
yep.
That's the new MediaTek chip for phones that you won't have in your phone.
Probably not. All right. Well, moving on from that, we're going to go ahead and talk about, like, everybody's favorite type of news is gigantic data breaches and stuff like that. So, this is just an interesting note that I wanted to toss out there, listener. Over this past week, we've gotten details released about how Verizon and T-Mobile were both hacked by a significant group of, I believe, Chinese-sponsored hackers. So, or was it Russia? It was either Russia or China. It always is. Sponsored hackers that had hacked into Verizon and T-Mobile services in order to, spy on customer interactions, get customer data, and may very well have also been able to listen in on customer calls and read text messages and so on and so forth. They were in there for a few months before they were found. And the way that they got access was via backdoors that Verizon and T-Mobile had put into their networks and services because they'd been mandated to do so by the United States government. So this is just generally awful. I think we're all in agreement. And as much as you hate Apple, they've been right about this entire time, because they have been so many times over the past decade. In fact, to the point where the U.S. government and police and law enforcement in general have stopped asking, because Apple's been so adamant about it, that no, we're not going to put any kind of backdoor into any of our services or operating systems or any of our encryption and stuff like that, just to make police officers' jobs easier when they're doing an investigation. Because the minute we do that, we compromise the security of our products. And sure, it might help you catch a criminal here and there, but it's also going to inevitably end up resulting in a gigantic security breach by nefarious actors from a foreign government or some other, ne'er-do-well group that is going to harm our customers and the American populace as a whole.
Yeah.
And so they have been refusing this whole time to put in a government-mandated backdoor, and here's Verizon and T-Mobile hacked via the government-mandated backdoor. So turns out Apple was in fact right about that this entire time, and the government can go suck it.
Well, this is a really good example. Yes, Apple and Google, Google's the same way. They've said, no, we're not putting in a backdoor into Android because that's stupid. Exhibit A. But this is an example, Apple and Google obviously have lobbyists that are in DC, doing their thing, because what major company doesn't?
Yeah,
but
they all do. Yep.
All the major phone carriers, like Verizon specifically, when Verizon's former CEO gets put as the head as the FTC, there's way more than just lobbyists going on in DC when it comes to these companies. So obviously they're going to cooperate because, obvious.
Yeah.
So that's so bad. And I really hope that somebody has learned a lesson from this. I don't think that's going to be the case. These backdoors are still going to be there because the government is just getting way too much information that they really shouldn't be. And they're not going to take away this. And Verizon and T-Mobile are just going to let it continue on because, so stupid and so bad.
Incredibly frustrating as a consumer. But yeah, good times. It's just Fun. That happened. Tech news. It's great. So I'm going to move on from tech news now because we're that particular rabbit hole doesn't get any brighter the further down it you go.
No.
And we're going to move into gaming news now. So this is an interesting thing that has come out over the past week that I definitely wanted to mention. Steam has changed the purchase page on, like, when you go to buy a game on Steam, to specify that when you are buying games, you aren't buying a product, you're buying a license to use a product.
Thank you,
Which, like,
Steam.
That was one of the things when we were talking about the Don't Kill Games initiative that, I was all like, this is something that's been floated as a possible thing that should be done to help address this. And they are now doing this. Now, this is not new, right? There's no change to Steam's user agreements, no change to the way that the games are in your library or anything like that. That's all the same. They're just spelling out clearly what was already happening when you go to check out. This appears to have been done in response to legislation that's going to be taking effect in California in 2025. They're just getting ahead of it and just putting it in now, and that makes perfect sense. Technically speaking, that's all you ever paid for with any software you've ever bought. Even if you got physical discs, you were only ever paying for a license to use this commercial software. Now, back in the day of physical discs and distribution along those lines and that kind of thing, you paid for the license to use the software that was on the discs. And if you had the physical discs, you were going to be able to use that license, right? Like, that was just how it was. Nowadays, with digital distribution, you're still paying for a software license. You don't own the software. The people who made the software have always owned the software, but you are licensed to use it. And they're just sort of acknowledging that, yes, this is a license. Yes, it can be revoked at any time based on the terms that you agreed to in the user agreement you didn't read when you started using the software or started playing the game. Because let's be honest, none of us have. And like that, so yeah, this is basically Steam just calling out like, hey, listen, this is a license to this game. You're going to get the game in your library. You're going to be able to download it and play it under the terms of this license that you're paying for right now. This license can be revoked, and if you violate the usage agreement, it will be revoked. And we're not guaranteeing you the ability to download this game in perpetuity and use this license. It could be taken away. That's basically all this is saying. So none of this is new. This is just Steam is spelling it out. And honestly, good guy Steam. I appreciate this. I think this is a good change. And I think you're going to see it cropping up in a lot of different places, especially where software purchases are concerned, due to this legislation that has been passed in the state of California. So as we talked about previously on the podcast, this is one of those situations where we were hoping legislation being passed in California was going to result in a trickle effect that was going to positively affect everyone's experience. And it seems like, at least in the case of Steam, it might.
Yeah. And it's like, I'm glad that you do clarify that this has always been the case. And some people that don't know that are going to be like, wait a minute, wait. This is completely different. No, it's really not.
No.
But I do really, really appreciate that they are now spelling that out for their users because, again, It is good to know that, yes, you might be paying money towards this, but it's not technically yours.
Yep.
Any digital product that you buy isn't yours to keep forever. Some companies are better about doing that than others. And this doesn't go just for gaming. This is just in general. Digital products aren't
anything
yours.
Like this.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's the thing is that like you think about it this way, listener. It's always been the case for software. Like from the earliest days of software purchasing, when you bought WordPerfect on 5.25-inch floppy disks, like the big ones, you know, big old floppy whatevers, and you stuck that thing in there, you didn't own WordPerfect, listener. You never owned any of them. You owned a license to use it. If you had then taken the code that was on those discs, modified it, and tried to sell it the way that you could do with a product that you owned, they would have come to you and sued your pants off because that's illegal, because you didn't own WordPerfect. You had a license to use it. That's how it's always been with software, video games included. Steam is spelling that out. The one wrinkle that we have in this day and age is that because you are only licensed to use this product and you do not actually own this product, and you bought it on a digital storefront, and a lot of them require an internet connection in this day and age and connection to some server somewhere, it can be killed by the developer or any number of other forces kind of at will. And that's the part that sucks. That's the part that is you got to pay attention to, particularly with a lot of new games that require an online connection or are inherently multiplayer or so on and so forth. And so it is bearing that tidbit in mind that I'm going to start introducing a new segment into the gaming portion of the podcast called Play This Instead, where I'm going to take a look at one of the major games that has just come out, and I'm going to recommend something else that you can play that is, while you are still only licensing the software, again, it's all just still technically just a license, probably not going to be easy for the developer to take away from you. It's going to be harder to get this license revoked. Now, anything on Steam is going to be inherently a little bit easier for the developer to take away because of the way that games are installed and played through the Steam client. That just inherently causes some problems, which means that games I recommend are going to tilt more toward independent purchases where, or, storefronts like itch.io or GOG, where you can download the whole installer directly from the website, store it offline. It's not calling home for a DRM registration when you install it and that kind of thing. So, all that bearing in mind, fairly recently, we're going to start off with low-hanging fruit for me because I didn't think about this until like an hour before the podcast. So, not a ton of research went into this one today, but fairly recently, Black Myth Wukong, large action RPG that was released, like a month ago, just about a month ago. Based in Chinese mythology, it is essentially Journey to the West, just except it's, not literally Journey to the West. Now, I have two options for you to play this instead. If you are looking for an incredible, in-depth RPG that you can play that has maybe not the best combat mechanics, which Black Myth Wukong has pretty good combat, but if you're not as much into it for the combat as you are for like a really interesting world that isn't rooted in just like the most vanilla Britain-based fantasy world or whatever, may I recommend for your playing pleasure The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which is currently available on GOG for $12.49. Like, it's 75% off right now, so hey, check that out. That offer ends on the 21st of October, so you got about a week. So, ready to go. Buy that. If, however, you're not necessarily looking for, a giant RPG, or if you've already played Witcher 3 Wild Hunt and you're more interested in Black Myth Wukong because of, hey, maybe you aren't familiar with the story of Journey to the West, may I also recommend Enslaved, Journey to the West, which is an action sort of RPG, mostly just an action game. It's based off of the myth of Journey to the West and has Andy Serkis as the playable character, nice. Which means that the cutscenes are, despite occasionally having really, really janky dialogue, the performances are just outstanding. Like, Andy Serkis is a win all the time, always and forever.
Yes.
So, if you want to play Black Myth Wukong, but you're like, you know what, man, this whole like the way modern games are handled and stuff like that, I'm just not into it. Play either of those instead. And next week I'm going to do a little bit more research. And if you want to influence what game I'm going to be talking about on Play This Instead, you should email us or comment on the website or social medias. There's a couple of different ways you can get a hold of us. And let me know, recent games, popular games. Next week, I'm probably going to be looking at that new Dragon Ball fighting game that came out this past week, because that seems to have been quite popular. So anyways,
now,
there you go.
I want to add on to this. If you're like me and, you're not into the whole gaming thing as much, but or if like you don't know the Journey to the West story and all that stuff, I'm going to recommend something going along with this theme. There's a podcast I listen to. It's called the Myths and Legends Podcast. It's absolutely fantastic. I've been listening to it almost since its inception, multiple years and years ago. He does all sorts of different stories, myths and legends, a lot of different Greek mythology, different stuff. But he's also been doing the Journey to the West he's done, I don't even know how many episodes he's done based on the Journey to the West. It's probably at least 50. And they're all about 45 minutes to an hour long episodes. It's fantastic. So if you want to know about the Journey to the West, but you don't want to play the games to get the storyline or don't want to look it up yourself, this is a great way to do it.
Yeah, if it's the story that's what's really drawing you to Black Myth Wukong, then hey, there's other ways to get that too.
Yeah.
It's a really old story. It's been told in many different formats for a very long time.
Yes.
You don't need to play this video game to get that. So there you go. That's all the gaming news that I have. So unless Landon has one more thing.
Yes, I do.
There it is.
Now, I didn't know fully whether, I almost put this just in regular news, but I'm like, no, I can use this as one more thing. Now, I don't know if this should go into the general tech news or the gaming news because of what it is. Now, it could go into both because it's an alarm clock. But it could go into general tech because it's an alarm clock. But it could also go into gaming because, listener, this is made by Nintendo. And if you haven't already seen this, that's very sad news for you because this thing is amazing. It's it's a Nintendo alarm clock, and it's exactly what you might expect from a Nintendo alarm clock. It's called
wild.
The Nintendo Sound Clock Alarmo, and it's the most interesting name. I can't say it's a bad name. It's just very Nintendo, and it's amazing. So what this thing does is it's a very basic. It's a Nintendo alarm clock. It does have a touch screen, from what I understand. But the way it works is it has a motion sensor on it, similar to Amazon, I think, has an alarm clock that does this. LG, I think, made an alarm clock that has different motion stuff, and you can get these type of things out there. More of those things are more made to track your sleep and different things like that. This doesn't track your sleep, but the way it wakes you up is it uses different sounds from different games. The games there's 5 different themes that they have here. There's Super Mario Odyssey, Pikmin 4, Splatoon 3, Ring Fit Adventure, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So you can get different themes, different sound packs, basically, for all of those different games. And they're absolutely awesome. And the way it works is when you set an alarm, it will go off playing a different theme from these different games, and based on your movements it will make different sounds. So say you start to stretch a little bit, it might, if you have the Super Mario theme going, if you stretch your arm up, it'll do a coin sound because you just punched a box or something like that. And if you start to get up, it'll get a little more excited. As you get more down, it starts to quiet down a little bit. And once you actually are fully up, it gives a full you won the game type sound, and it's It's absolutely awesome. Now, you can turn that off. You can have it just button mode. And so it won't do all the different sounds with your movement and different things like that. So it's not quite as fun, but it is still an alarm clock that has good sounds to it. Like these are sounds that you're used to if you've played these games. And the biggest downside here is it is $100 for this alarm clock. And also, they do say that if you are not the only person in the bed, the motion sensors don't quite work as well because it's picking up motions from two different people or a pet or something like that might be in your bed with you. So that's an unfortunate thing. I wish that they had this one, but also maybe a button-only version. Like, you can have a button-only mode, but I wish they had a button-only version for like $50. And if they had that, man, this thing would sell like crazy. I think this is already going to sell fairly well just because it's Nintendo, and Nintendo fans are absolutely insane. I mean, I'm one of them.
Yeah.
I absolutely love this. I'm not going to buy one because I don't necessarily need it, but I still love, like, if they had the $50 one that was button only, I would be very tempted because it's just great. You need to look up the video they came out with to describe this thing. It's a couple minutes long, but it shows all the different stuff on it. It's fantastic. And yeah, that's my one more thing. I had to end it on a good note because this episode has been all over the place.
That is a much more positive ending, I will say. I saw this thing, and the concept of $100 alarm clock that is going to basically mandate that you stay single, and like, I don't know. It is hilarious to me, but maybe the most hilarious thing about it was that based on the announcement, based on the way they were talking about it and everything, Nintendo engineers spent a bunch of time on this thing, and they're really proud. Yeah. Like, they're super proud of this thing, guys, and they just want to show it to you. Look at it. It's nifty. And I'm like, it's like hard. I can't get mad. I can't be mad about that. They earnestly were like, dude, we made this cool product. You're going to love it. Check it out. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right, guys. Good job. Have a sticker. I don't know.
Anybody that's going to buy this thing is going to legitimately love it.
That's probably true.
I don't know there might be people that's like, oh, I'm not going to buy it because whatever. But there might be people that are on the fence like, oh, I'll buy it and try it out. And they're going to love it. It's not going to be this is the dumbest thing I've ever purchased. No, people are going to like it. They might not use it as much as Nintendo wants you to, but nobody's going to hate this thing if they buy it.
Yeah, I think it's, fair to say anybody who buys this is going to be of such a demographic that they are going to love it.
Yes.
And it's the kind of product that I suspect would be extremely polarizing, meaning that a lot of people would probably think it is the dumbest product ever, but they don't need to buy it to think that. No. They take one look at the product page and they're like, absolutely not. And so in that way, seems like an appropriately designed and marketed product, which, okay,
those people are going to be going to buy their
audience.
Yeah. The people that are like, that's the dumbest thing ever, have already got their PS5 Pros. So
yeah. I mean, to be fair, there's a ton of overlap between.
I know.
I think most of the people who look at that and think that's the dumbest thing ever are people who just don't play video games much, like, at all. And that's a bunch of consumers. And then, probably about 50% of all the gamers out there are like, that's ridiculous. And I fall into that camp. But it's not like I can be angry at this thing for existing because, again, the engineers are just so happy about it. You can tell, like, and the producers and everyone, they're like, this is great. We love it. And I just think they're a part of their target audience. And I think their target audience is going to buy it and think it's just the niftiest thing ever. They're going to have a great time. And they're going to really get a kick out of, like, every day when they wake up getting, like, a little... and they'll be so happy. And then, that'll, like, nice, bright start to their day. And, oh, isn't that nice? So, yeah, what a wild What a wild thing.
I mean, I am fully in the group of the people that think this is ridiculous, because it absolutely is. But I still love it. And if I had just expendable money to throw at random crap, I probably would buy one. But I don't, so I'm not going to. But it's still great.
Yep. Oh, man. Well, that is a wild way to end what has turned out to be kind of a wild episode of the podcast.
Oh,
it's just,
yeah.
We're out in the wilderness today, listener. All right. Well, I think that does then bring us to the end of the podcast. So we appreciate you listening in this week with us. We appreciate your support. And we appreciate you going and getting in contact with us to tell us what you love about the podcast, what you hate about the fact that Wes isn't here. And also, any feedback on video games you'd like me to recommend alternatives for at some point in the future. You can get in contact with us to communicate all of those things via email at, it's podcast@callingallplatforms.com. I remembered it. You can also comment on the website at callingallplatforms.com. You can find us on Twitter at CapTechPod. It is still Twitter. I'm not sure if anyone has told you that. You can also find us on Facebook, Calling All Platforms, and you can find us on YouTube at Calling All Platforms Tech and or Calling All Platforms Gaming. Whether or not you're going to find any new videos there, I can't say, but if you leave comments on the old videos, I will see those. That is the thing that I do pay attention to. Just not an upload schedule, because who has time for that?
Yeah.
And you can also find us back here next week on the podcasting app of your choice. So until then, bye-bye.
See ya.
Calling All Platforms is a production of Supporter Sound Studios. To learn more about how you can support the podcast, go to www.patreon.com/callingallplatforms.